Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What's there to say that hasn't been said? It's one of the most successful franchises of the 1980s. From toys to cartoons, it felt like they were unstoppable.
But to be realistic, the Turtles weren't introduced in this manner.
No, the real story actually began in May of 1984 with a comic book by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. The comics revolve around 4 mutant turtles named after 4 Renaissance artists: Leonardo the leader, Donatello the genius, Raphael the smartmouth, and Michelangelo the crazy one. They are trained in ninjutsu by their master, a rat named Splinter.
But there was one tiny little problem with the comics.
They all wore red masks, and those unfamiliar with the turtles would have a hard time identifying who's who,
unless referred to by name.
Anyways, when the comics were published, they were a success and sales continued to rise.
But let's fast forward 3 years and see Turtle Mania really explode.
1987 is where the Ninja Turtles' popularity really exploded.
The toys and cartoons really helped the Turtles reach popularity.
But there was a catch. In order to make a dream a reality, alterations had to be made to make it more marketable to a younger audience.
Which meant the violence had to be toned down, language erased, and the overall aesthetic less dark.
Additionally, make the villains less threatening, have them love pizza, but most importantly, give each turtle their own color bandana.
Before I go on, let me make it clear that this is basic business and marketing.
With that said, most people got introduced to the Turtles through the video games, and this review will focus on the 3 NES games first.
Before I go on, let me point out that this is going to be a huge project and I won't cover everything at once.
With that out of the way, let's continue with the first game, TMNT for the NES. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES was developed by Ultra and published by Konami and released on June 25, 1989. The plot starts off with Shredder kidnapping April O'Neil, but as you progress, each stage has a different objective. While I'm on topic of different, most people remember Stage 2, perhaps the hardest stage of all.
I myself became a victim of the dreaded swimming level.
This would be a perfect opportunity to talk about the controls. Thankfully, you only swim once in the game, and let me just say, they are the worst swimming controls.
The navigation is what makes it a nightmare.
Not only do you have to be precise, you also have to avoid the underwater hazards.
Easier said than done.
If you do manage to make it with all 4 turtles, consider yourself the luckiest player. The rest of the time, however, the controls are a little better, but barely. The issue stems from how floaty the turtles are once they leave the ground.
I should also mention that it's easy to lose control in mid-air.
Thankfully, the attacks and movement are pretty basic, but work well. Speaking of attacks, this is the only game where each turtle feels different. Leonardo has average everything, Michelangelo has slightly faster but weaker attacks with a slightly shorter range, Donatello has the reach and strength but lacks speed, and Raphael has speed but lacks strength and range. Each turtle can be changed to suit the situation.
Most players value Donatello, but once he's gone,
it's pretty much over. But what the game doesn't tell you is that you can rescue your turtles in the later stages. Along the way, you collect power-ups in the form of special weapons with limited ammo.
There is an invincibility power-up, but it doesn't show up often.
The graphics and sound are what you expect from a Konami game in the 1980s. Despite only having about 10 songs, they do fit each stage nicely. The graphics, however, are decent, but it seems each character looks a little weird. Speaking of weird, most of the enemies are those that most people don't remember.
The only enemies most people remember are the Foot Clan, Shredder, Rocksteady, and Bebop.
The biggest offender is that this game hasn't aged well and only gets 2 pizzas out of 5. Next on the list is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, which once again was published by Ultra and developed by Konami and released on December 14, 1990.
This is a port of the arcade from 1989.
If I can put this game into one word, it's improved. The gameplay is much simpler, and each turtle, despite feeling the same, have much smoother attacks.
Each turtle has a basic attack, a kick, and a power attack.
What sets this game apart from the arcade is that there are 2 extra stages.
Did we really need 2 extra stages?
Speaking of stages, some of the original stages are a bit longer than their arcade counterpart, but at the same time, the enemy count had to be changed to accommodate the NES's hardware. Speaking of enemies, the bosses in this game were also altered. At the end of the parking garage, we get Baxter Stockman. Stages 3 and 6 also gave us 2 original bosses in the form of Tora and Shogun, respectively. The graphics and sound, once again, are top-notch for Konami standards.
I forgot to mention that this time each turtle looks different, as 2 turtles are dark-colored and 2 are light-colored.
But does this beat the original arcade game? Yes, it does. Is it the best game? So far, this game gets 4 pizzas out of 5. Last up for part 1 is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project.
No relation to the actual Manhattan Project.
The game was solely developed and published by Konami and released on February 1st, 1992.
I should have mentioned that each game was released between each season of the cartoons.
The plot is that while on vacation, Shredder takes April and Manhattan hostage by sending Manhattan Island up to the sky, and now it's up to the Turtles to stop Shredder once again. Gameplay and control as a whole remains unchanged, but there are some minor updates. First, when you press down and attack, the Turtles can hoist an enemy over their heads. When you press jump and attack at the same time, each Turtle can execute a special attack at the expense of some energy. There are more bosses this time around to fight.
This is probably done to keep up with that current season's animated series.
The graphics and sound this time are a slight downgrade, but still good enough. Manhattan Project gets 3.5 pizzas out of 5.
Stick around for part 2 and the arcade games.